Hi guys, so today I want to touch on this really yummy, juicy writing technique that can make your story way more powerful. And I've touched on it before, which is the idea of pairing and crossing opposites. And if you've watched my other videos, you might be like, okay, yeah, we've talked about this. No, but we haven't talked about it like this, you guys. You gotta hear this today. Okay, so before I've talked about how when you pair and cross opposites, it makes the story more powerful. And this is because there's this breadth, right? It's the breadth between extremes that enables the audience to feel emotions more powerfully. And I'm going to talk about exactly why that is and exactly how to do that. So we tend to think that if we want to write a story that hits a particular emotion powerfully, that we have a lot of scenes that hit that emotion. So for example, if we want to write a story that makes people cry, we may think that having most of the story made up of tragic scenes is what will do that. But the reality is that the audience actually experiences stronger, rawer feelings when you contrast emotions. Tragic scenes become more powerful when they have humorous scenes in the same story. And it all gets back to what I talked about before is writing foils. So when we pair opposites, we create contrast. Contrast is so important, you guys. Nobody talks about it, but it's so important. We are pulling, when we're doing these opposites, we are pulling the audience from one extreme to the other. And as we are yanking them from one end of the spectrum to the other, and all that breadth that they've travels between that, it makes the experience feel sharper. It's like going from like hot water to cold water, right? The cold feels colder because we just experienced the hot. And as an example, I'm going to refer to Interstellar because this movie does this beautifully on so many different levels. First, just so we can talk about it, I'm going to talk about some of the emotions that we see in Interstellar, and I'm going to talk about how those cross and why that's powerful. So I've heard a lot of people, myself included, would say that this movie made us feel very powerful emotions. And so here's some of the emotions, right? We get heartache about everything that's going on. It's very human. We have Cooper and Murph's relationship, Cooper and Tom's relationship, Cooper's detachment from the Endurance. Like, that's a lot of heartache. The outcome of Miller's planet, Amelia's isolation. It's all through the movie. Like, I have it listed in my post, but I'm not going to read all of it on this audio. Okay, then we have wonder, right? That feeling of awe and curiosity mixed together. This is the trademark emotion of any like speculative fiction, whether you're doing fantasy, science fiction, or speculative horror. The point of this genre is to elicit this emotion of like wonder, of being like wowed and like awed by something, and like that's the reason the audience seeks out that type of fiction, seeks out speculative fiction. So, this usually comes from like something new or otherworldly. So obviously we have like all this stuff with space. Like this is the first movie that showed us what a black hole would actually look like, and they talked about wormholes, and we have gravity and time and the apocalypse with the blight and dust. All of these things relate to that feeling of wonder. Even fantasy is like more interesting when it seems to have some kind of science to it or something, calls back to old concepts. Like, we use a lot of dragons and vampires that people used to believe in, and it's more interesting, like, when it's tied to the truth. For a non-speculative example, you can look at, like, the Da Vinci Code, one of the best-selling books of our day. One of the reasons it did this so well was because it was tied well to, like, a history. And it's, like, tying from what we already know. So basically, like, this emotion, it gains more power because in Interstellar, it pulls from what the human race already, like, gets wonder out of. And we all wonder about, like, space and time. So the content kind of evokes wonder on its own. But the Nolans, like, they capitalize on it by grounding all that wonder into plausible science. If we get out too far, well, this is for another day, but if we do too much wonder without explaining it, it actually doesn't make us feel wonder very powerfully, at least in this day and age. Maybe it did back before people knew a lot about science. Anyway, okay, there's also this kind of horror element in the movie. There's this feeling of horror, terror, right? It actually kind of relates to wonder. It's like the opposite in a way. Because when we encounter something new, David Farland taught me this, it can either be more fascinating than we expected, which is wonder, or it can be more horrifying or scarier than we expected, which is closer to horror. So we have this kind of horror element, like going through this wormhole. Wow, that's really scary. Things get really shaky. One of the guys expresses his fear of dying in the vacuum of space. The way time flows on Miller's planet, like, that's kind of horrifying, trying to survive that. Dr. Mann trying to kill Cooper, that's kind of horrifying as he's, like, suffocating. Watching Dr. Mann wreak havoc on the Endurance, going through the black hole, Cooper injecting himself out, like, all of these things. So, like Wonder, the Terror in Interstellar, it feels particularly powerful because it's playing off our own imagined fears of being in space. So it's more terrifying because it's tied to truth. And most of that stuff could really happen in that situation. Okay, then there's this feeling of love, and obviously this isn't like romantic love, which I thought was kind of refreshing. But just as horror goes with wonder, I feel like yeah, so I talked about horror and wonder, right? So think of those are like opposites. Okay, and love, I talked about heartache, so kind of think of love and heartache as opposites. So just as horror goes with wonder, love goes with heartache. So we have like this thing with Cooper and Murph's relationship, like they love each other. Cooper and Tom, they love each other. Amelia has her relationship with her father, and like eventually Cooper's relationship with Amelia, right? They come to love each other, not romantically, but like as partners. And Amelia has her relationship with Edmund. And so the emotion gets it gets an extra push though from the thematic elements in the story too. Okay, so those are the big four emotions. And remember I pointed out that those are actually opposites of each other. And those emotions that we felt very, I feel like in the movie they were very raw, is what I like to call it. And I'll have a future video where I talk about what I mean by raw emotion. But because like we relate to them so well, so to the wonder and the horror of space and to the relationships, and we can put ourselves right in those situations and like experience those emotions. There's just a few other ones, right? Like we have suspense going on in the movie. It feels very real. We have a sense of mystery, like trying to figure out who they is with the ghost and everything. We have some moments of humor. So we're getting like a nice variety of different emotional appeals. Okay, so then the Nolans, they really pack a punch with each of these emotions. So if you'll notice, like I said, we have like a nice variety of emotions that we can tap into for the story now because of what's happening in the content of it. But even more, notice is how powerfully the Nolans are tapping into each one. So Tarsa's lines aren't just kind of funny, like they're pretty funny, some of his lines, right? They're bona fide funny. Cooper watching his messages from home, it's not just kind of sad, like that was like devastating. It's like heart-wrenching. Okay, the wormhole, the black hole, and everything else in space, it's not just kind of cool. Like that was like wonder, like maxed out. So in short, like everything was pulled up to like this high quality of writing. Like nothing was left as blah or okay or good enough. And like if you aren't a writer, like take it, I'm assuming you are if you're watching this, but maybe somebody just likes Interstellar. But if you aren't a writer, like take it from me, like writing everything so that like it's more than good enough or even more than great is like freaking difficult. And in the past I wrote about like 5 different variations. Like when I was working on a scene, I wrote like 5 different variations of like the same short dialogue exchange because it wasn't funny enough and it wasn't witty enough and it wasn't funny enough and it wasn't witty enough. I just had to keep writing it over to try to find it. And it didn't have enough of a punch. And then like the 4th one I wrote, it was too mean, so then I had to come up with something else. So it's not just about like making sure you have the right emotions in it, but it's also making sure that those lines that they carry emotion, like the emotional pack, like packs a punch. Okay, think about how the emotion of wonder, like it would have paled if the Nolans just decided to make their wormhole and black hole look like they've always been done in movies. Like we've seen that before, right? We would still get like a sense of wonder, but it wouldn't have been as powerful. Instead, like they packed a punch, right? They created something that hasn't been seen before. They created something real. They didn't settle for like blah. Like they took the quality like way up, baby. And even just like doing these 2 things is great. But here's the thing, they did even more to ramp up the emotion. So let's look at some of those pairs, right? Wonder and horror, love and heartache. This is where we get into some of the crazy, nice, yummy, juicy stuff. Okay, so opposition all things. So what's genius is that the Nolans often smashed those emotions together. We get this wonder of this wormhole, and again, like the wonder's maxed out. But once they get far enough inside, right, we get scared that the Endurance, it starts shaking, and we wonder, like, we get wonder of Miller's planet, like, it's, wow, this is amazing. Then we get the horror of the waves and Doyle's quick death. And we get like the wonder of man's planet, you know, icy and like look how beautiful. And then we have the scare of him trying to kill Cooper. And then we have like Cooper suffocating in space. And we like watch in horror as like man blows up the Endurance. And so everywhere in the movie, the Nolans are like balancing the horror found in the realities of space travel with the wonder found in the beauty of it. Because horror and wonder contrast each other, and the Nolans pull us from one to the other, we feel each emotion more sharply. Last time I talked about how the Nolans like broke some of the traditional sci-fi rules, if you'd call them rules. They made the future like very similar to our day, for example, instead of like all this new technology. This made the futuristic setting more relatable to the audience, and they made the apocalypse kind of more gentle, and so the Earth was still beautiful, and it was sad to leave it. But do you know why like that works so well? It's because, like, and I'm gonna tell you why. It relates to this, right? Imagine they didn't do those things. Imagine that their setting looks like very futuristic, and that the Earth is experiencing like a very violent apocalypse, and it's a dreadful place. That setting of Earth is like jam-packed with like wonder and horror. But here's the thing. So space. So instead of pairing opposites, we've created more of the same thing. This isn't necessarily wrong, mind you, but like now we have otherworldly competing with otherworldly, which actually dulls our emotional sensitivity to it. We're jumping from one pool of cold water to another pool of colder water. We still feel the cold, but it's not as sharp. Instead, we're kind of becoming more numb to it. But Interstellar didn't do that, right? They gave us like this hot water, right? The relatability, the beauty, the homey setting, the farm, the baseball game, the parent-teacher conference. You know, there's a little bit of wonder and horror because, like, I mean, we did need a species-threatening reason to leave the Earth after all to make the story work. So there had to be something. But making Earth and space opposites, like, we feel each more powerfully as we travel between them. So we have like the hot water of like Earth feeling homey, with like the cold water of space being kind of more alien and larger and like unreachable. And everywhere the Nolans are crossing opposites and hitting us like right in the feels because of it. So like we have the whole, like the survival of the whole human race, it crosses with like a single human relationship, Murph and Cooper. But having both parts in the story, each part is more powerful. We understand the importance of saving the human race better because we have the beauty and complexity that is Murph and Cooper's personal relationship. As Cooper strives to save the human race, we understand better the significance of his relationship with Murph. So each one comes into sharper focus because of the other, right? Hot water, cold water. And it's made more effective by how relatable the relationship of a parent and a child is. I mean, that's pretty universal. It's unconditional. It's very human. So the Nolans pair opposites even inside Cooper and Murph's relationship itself, which makes that relationship, again, more powerful. At the beginning of the movie, we can clearly see that they love each other and they have affection for each other. But that love is paired with anger and hatred that Murph feels over her father leaving. If the Nolans had instead only made Murph and Cooper's relationship loving and affectionate, it wouldn't even be half as effective. It wouldn't even have made half the impact on the audience. It seems so ironic, but it's the very fact that the love is contrasted with hate that makes this relationship hit us in the gut and makes us feel the love more strongly. And still, the pairing goes further, right? We see it over and over again. Like, if you ever need an example of this, just like go put in Interstellar because it's crazy. We see Cooper's loyalty to his family, right? We feel it. He's always focused on getting back to them. But loyalty is the opposite of betrayal, which is exactly what Murph feels when she finds out Plan A was a ruse. And again, there's this moment in the story, the midpoint, when Dr. Brandt dies, where these two emotions, they cross directly. And in the wake, Cooper becomes more determined than ever to get home, and Murph becomes more angrier than ever that her dad left her for dead. So betrayal and loyalty cross directly halfway through the movie, while the intimate and like vast cross directly at the end of the movie, like I talked about in that earlier video. Right? Like we have the most vast thing of space, the most unknowable thing inside of a black hole, and time and understanding those things crosses directly with Murph and her bedroom and that relationship on a little farm, those opposites. So the Nolans, they paired opposites everywhere on a macro level, even on a smaller level. You'll see it happens in small instances. So when Cooper and Murph, they reunite, They don't have this huge sob fest to create this feeling of heartache. Instead, we see them laugh over the fact Murph told everyone Cooper loves farming. I mean, it makes the heartache more potent because it's the opposite. When we switch to the serious emotions, it's sharper because we had that moment of humor. And note too, we have that Murph says this line, "I knew you'd come back." And it feels more powerful after we witness that she, quote, knew he wouldn't. So those are opposites. Similarly, when Cooper detaches from the Endurance, right, he jokes to Brand about being only 90% honest with her. And that humor and that sadness, they're opposites. So, here are some of the key reasons that I think this story was so well done that we've covered, right? It has a nice range of emotions, and note that there's contrasting emotions in there, opposites. It has high quality writing to really nail that high note of each emotion. It really gets the most out of all of those. And then at 3, it's pairing opposites everywhere on a macro level, but also on a micro level. Okay, next time I'm going to talk about another key reason why I feel like the story was so well written and it had such a powerful impact, and we can use that in our stories too. But for now, see you guys later. You can get my latest writing tips at septembercfox.com. Thanks for following. Please subscribe. Thanks. Have a great day. Don't forget to cross those opposites.